What's up, and welcome to the Level Health Podcast. Today, Josh is interviewing Dr. Christopher Swart. Chris is an assistant professor of exercise science at American International College. He has his PhD in exercise physiology from Springfield College, where he also taught. He's a certified strength and conditioning coach, and he's worked with several D1 athletic programs, as well as athletes ranging from youths to professionals. He has a knack for breaking down complex fitness information for those of us that don't want to dig into all the science and research. It's always great when you can find a resource like his Instagram that is putting out useful information that you can really trust. Big thanks to Dr. Swart for coming on our show. You can follow him on Instagram at dr.swart. We'll have that linked in the description below. For those of you that don't already know, our website, Level Health, is a directory, community, and network of qualified personal trainers. We want to help create a space where clients are able to find the right trainer for them. We have accounts for both clients and fitness professionals. Client accounts are always free, where you'll get access to our trainer directory and other resources. Our Basic Pro option is now available for trainers. We also have our free membership option for those that want to access our growing list of discounts and resources. Some of you have already signed up for the waitlist for our verified membership. If you haven't, there will be plenty of opportunities to do so in the future, so make sure you're signed up for our newsletter for updates. If you haven't signed up already, head over to levelhealth.net and set up your membership. Thanks for listening, and if you have a second, we would love it if you gave us a rating and review so that our podcast and the professionals we interview can get more exposure. You could also subscribe so you don't miss any of our new content. Thanks, and we hope you enjoy the episode.
I'm still in this position, as I'm sure most of the United States is, that we need this formal college education. How do you, so you said that you get a lot of pushback from your colleagues. How are you voicing this to people, and how do you see kind of the state of higher education in the United States?
You know, that's a great question. And there's so many, that could be a whole podcast in and of itself, obviously.
I know.
But, I look at it from the standpoint of, when you go to a college and you go get a degree at a college institution, clearly, as long as you're going to a good institution, you're going to get some good information. Don't get me wrong. But what I look at from like the higher ed standpoint is you're going to get like a bird's eye view of the field. That's kind of what higher education is. If you want the nuance and you want like the day-to-day or the detail of how to actually apply that information to the real world, me personally, and I say this as a college professor, I think in a lot of circumstances, you're going to get better information out of things like, if you're following the right people on YouTube, social media, podcasts, people that are actually practitioners that are in the field on a day-to-day basis. They're the ones that see things typically ahead of the research. And so like in my position, I try and really make sure that I understand that. The people who are at the highest levels, they're going to see things that I've never seen or can't see yet until it comes to fruition in different research articles. So, when it comes to the standpoint of higher education, like I've said before, I think it's super important for people to just realize what they're getting. They're getting that bird's eye view. They're getting the science. They're getting the cell physiology. But most professors, and I say this, and I've met a lot of professors in my day, most professors at this point, especially as their career progresses, they get more and more removed from the actual applied field. So, yes, their conversation and their knowledge base has merit, but at the same time, it might not be what needs to be learned about today, in today's current climate of fitness and health. And that's a really important talking point that I think more people need to bring up. And that's why, well, we'll probably get into this in a little bit. That's why I've also, that's why I diversify my time outside of higher ed. I also spend time on social media. I also work for another company where we create online programs. I just recently started competing in, kind of getting into the CrossFit world because, I want students and people that kind of follow me to know that I'm still doing it too, even though I have this vantage point as a little bit older older, so to speak, professional compared to the fitness people that are out there. Typically, I'm still there grinding and trying to, learn the applied side of it as well. And we need more people like that in academia.
God, wouldn't that be such an amazingly beautiful synergy if there was some sort of communication between that? I mean, it'd be ridiculous to say that all college professors have to walk the walk 100%, because I mean, I've spoken with my professors. I know they're very strapped for time and they're doing their best to teach us. But I mean, I'm in a STEM school where a lot of the professors didn't go there to be a professor. They went there specifically for to do research. So that obviously adds some friction as well. But I mean, that kind of synergy. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with fitness professionals across the industry, across other industries as well, and they're all coming to the same kind of realization that it's almost 100% more about the application than the X's and O's. And so I think, at least as we're going through higher education, I think that a hallmark of a good professor may be to at least address that. And I believe that I heard you say that in one of your podcasts, that addressing that, hey, there's the X's and O's, this is what your textbook is going to say, but then there's the application and how you will actually apply this. Because there's, I mean, like I said, like you said, we'll get into some of these specific examples, but there's definitely a big middle ground that's not being serviced or spoken to a lot. And it seems like that's kind of where you're at. And then I guess on that note, man, we skipped like a bunch of stuff, and I'm sure we'll touch on everything that I want to, though. But I wanted to start out by just giving us, if you don't mind, just giving us some background on who you are and why you do what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Dr. Chris Swart. I am currently an assistant professor at American International College, which is in Springfield, Massachusetts. My main background is in sport performance. So that's how I kind of got into this field. I was an athlete my whole life. My parents were really good athletes, so they instilled that kind of, body in motion type of, attitude of, physical activity is going to make you a better quality human being. And I firmly believe that. And I believe that as a young person. And I believe that sports teach you a lot about leadership and teamwork and stuff like that. So I was always an athlete. I loved it. And when I went to college, that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to somehow help athletes. I didn't know which way I wanted to go. I didn't know if I was going to be more on the rehab side or if I was going to be more on the preventative side. And when I first went into college, I went in as an athletic trainer. So I had a couple like kind of small muscle tweaks when I was a high school athlete. So I wanted to help athletes not have those same injuries. And then I had even worse injuries in college, playing college football. And that's what put me in the field of strength and conditioning, because I realized there's so many programs out there at the youth level, at the high school level, that just don't have good strength programs and conditioning programs and aren't doing things the right way. They don't understand nutrition. And it's setting athletes up for, really, in my opinion, failure. So I wanted to kind of fill that gap in the field. So I got into football, strength and conditioning. That was my first love, because that was what I played as an athlete. So I worked at the University of Connecticut for a little bit. That was my first internship. It was my first experience into D1 athletics. So I worked with football. And then from there, I got a position at the University of Iowa, worked there for a little bit, and then the University of Maryland, pretty much all with football. So I dabbled in other sports, but football, was kind of the key thing. And then once I realized I had a knack for taking complex information and making it more simple, that people could like take that information, actually benefit their quality of life, then some people started recommending, hey, go get a PhD, you should do it. So I decided to do that. I went to Springfield College in Massachusetts. And then from there, like I said, I've taught at 4 different institutions at this point, one of which I did my undergraduate and master's degree at. So it was really cool to go back to the same location that I was once a student and actually have some input as, how can I grow the field of exercise science or physiology? How can I build from what I've seen in the real world compared to what I now see in academia? And that's been an interesting shift. And then just the last thing I'll say is some other side projects that I work on. I work with an addiction company right now called Revive of the USA, and I oversee the fitness and nutrition aspect of that company. And basically, we help people as they transition from sober homes or rehabs into fitness and health. I also work for another company called Jason Brown Coaching, where we set up online programming and online courses, content, kind of what I do in the classroom at AIC, but in the virtual kind of realm. And I really enjoy that. It's great to be able to help people all around the globe, really. And then I also am the president of a cannabis company, but kind of like a health company in general. It's called Total Health. It's a family-owned business, and we use cannabis and some of the cannabinoids that I feel are very beneficial for overall health. And we combine your own nutrition and wellness and health program and kind of combine the two. So very active in the field in many different ways. And that's why I've been so passionate to kind of get into this podcast world, because I feel like this will allow me to get a bigger reach and be able to kind of just share the knowledge and information that I've gained throughout the years.
Why is strength training not being, because I mean, that was one of the other big questions I wanted to ask, because it seems like the health benefits of resistance training, strength training, they're kind of synonymous there. If you wanted to kind of parse those two definitions out, that'd be great, so people can differentiate the two. But the health benefits of resistance training seem almost too good to be true. Like, they seem to be compounding in a way that nothing else that we can do in the gym, in the kitchen, or anything will impact us to the same degree. Obviously, nutrition plays just an enormous role, but in terms of exercise, like, it seems to be the one, it got shoved to the side for decades, it seemed like, and obviously this field and certainly the research within it is evolving. It's very young, but I mean, people have known for a while that lifting weights is good. Why is it at this point, it's 2022, why is it not being applied more?
All right, so let's start off with, let's define some terms, right? Because I think people who are listening really need to know the difference between resistance training and strength training. And then there's a bunch of subsets from there that we could talk about. But essentially, let's start off with resistance training, because that's the key term. Resistance training is nothing more than work or force that your muscle has to produce. And that can come in many forms. So when people think of resistance training, most of the general public is going to think of weights, iron, dumbbells, things like that. Your own body weight can be resistance. You can use these suspension trainers like TRX trainers, where you do like the different rows and all these exercises. You can use free weights. You can use bands. So there's a lot of different tools that are available to put your body through resistance. And that's what I want everybody to do. So, if you're the person out there listening thinking, well, I'm a little intimidated to lift weights, but I recognize that I need to work my muscles, that's where things like suspension trainers, body weight, those types of things can be a great starting point. So that's resistance training in and of itself. When someone says strength training, the word strength is important in that, because what they're getting at is, or what I think they should be getting at, is when someone says I'm strength training, they're lifting weights or doing resistance training for the purpose of getting stronger. Then there's also a way that you can resistance train to build more muscle. You can also resistance train to build more muscle endurance. So briefly, I'm just going to talk about those three, just so we have a jumping off point, and then I'll get into why I think that these things aren't used enough. So let's just talk about strength training first. So when someone says they're strength training, what I hope they're getting at is, like I said before, they're trying to get stronger. And if you're going to focus on strength training to get stronger, you need heavier weights. Typically, it's lower repetitions. So when I say heavy weights, what I mean is, let's say somewhere between 80 to 100% of your maximal 1RM. That's the amount of weight you can lift one time. So if you want to get stronger, clearly you got to lift heavy weights. You also need to lift less repetitions. So when someone says that they're training for strength, it's heavy weight. It's typically less repetitions, maybe somewhere between 1 and 6 or 8 repetitions. So it's on the lower end of the spectrum, and they have longer rest. On the flip side of that, somebody that's looking to train mainly for muscle growth, or what we call muscle hypertrophy, and the hypertrophy is a term that just means a bigger cross-sectional area. Typically, when I do muscle hypertrophy training, it's anywhere between 30 or 40 to 80% of your maximal weight. And usually it really comes down to, are you stressing your muscle close to failure?
Mm.
And when I say muscular failure, that means like I'm about to do one more rep and I can't get that last repetition. That's muscle failure. I'm not saying that people have to train to muscle failure, but you should train close to that if you're looking to grow muscle. So based off of the research, I typically recommend somewhere between 1 to 5 reps of failure. And usually, if you look at number of sets per muscle group, because people will ask that question, it's about 10 sets or greater per muscle group per week, close to failure. So that's how you grow muscle mass. And then last but not least, if we want to just get into the endurance side of it, typically with muscle endurance training, we're looking at lighter weights, more repetitions with a lighter rest. So more like your traditional circuit training. So that's my whole point, is like when people start to talk about weight training or resistance training, you got to define those terms first. Now, I'll just get into briefly why I feel that strength training or resistance training isn't utilized as much as it should be. The first point is effort. It's not easy. It takes effort. It takes personal responsibility for you as the person that wants to get stronger or more muscle. You have to stay consistent with it. You have to go in a certain number of times per week or do it at your own home, whatever the case may be. You don't have to go to a fitness facility, but it's very difficult to gain strength or muscle mass if it's only one day a week. You can do it when you first start, but traditionally you have to stay consistent with it. It has to be relatively frequent, and there needs to be some good effort level to it. And so that personal responsibility to stay consistent is a challenge. And we could talk about how to stay consistent. That's a whole separate thing. The other thing I want to talk about briefly is most people look for the quick fixes. So when someone says like, oh, I want to build muscle or I want to get stronger, immediately people's minds go to supplements. How can I supplement to do these things? And that needs to be diffused right away. Like, we don't want to go right to that. We want to develop our own physiology first, then add supplements beyond that. And last but not least, the last quick thing before I let you jump in is there's really not a lot of money in recommending resistance training. So if I'm a fitness professional and I say, hey, I want you to resistance train 3 to 5 days a week, I want you to do this many sets or this many reps, and this is going to be what I think is going to be best for you based off of your goals, that I'm not selling a product per se. I can sell my coaching, but what's really making money in unfortunately in today's climate, is people that are selling, hey, instead of resistance training or going as hard as you need to, buy this pre-workout, buy this supplement that's going to build more muscle, buy this supplement that's going to boost your metabolism or your testosterone. And people are getting sold on that. And, human nature of, hey, I have a pain point, this is my problem, and this is a quick fix or the path of least resistant. This is where people are going. And those are my main issues. And those are the reasons why I feel resistance training isn't as broadly used as it should be, mainly because it's hard work. It takes time and effort.
Dr. Swart, we're going to have to do a whole another podcast because there was like 15 things there I wanted to touch on. But I feel as if the most important route to go down from that one, you mentioned that it isn't sexy to sell resistance training. And a big part of it is that there is that effort required. It is, it is asking somebody to put in effort. But I feel as if that where fitness pros go wrong, and it bothers me the most of all, is when we make it more difficult than it needs to be. And whether that's our own ignorance, whether that's the ignorance of the fitness professional, or that's just the personality, I don't know. Or it could be, like you said, that's how they're selling it. They're selling it as this crazy hard intense 8-week program that's going to make them temporarily lighter, but leave them in no better off, at the end of the day. But I feel that a big part of where we go wrong as fitness professionals is we just make that barrier too high. Like a good fit, like you were saying a while back, making something as simple as possible, but no simpler. That can apply absolutely to your programming, your guidance that you give your clients and the people that you work with, because again, we just make it way too hard. You were saying 1 day a week you'll get progress. Absolutely, especially if you're detrained, you will make progress 1 day a week. you were saying that, starting people with just body weight or, very light resistance bands. Not only is that, possible, you can definitely build muscle that way, but it's probably the better way to go. I always start people with body weight movements. Let's identify, any limitations that you have. Because if we throw a bar on your back before I know that you can squat down to a chair and stand back up like you should, like what are we even doing? Like, so I think that as fitness professionals, we could do a better job of just making a little bit, just lowering that barrier to entry. Because like, what else are we here to make it more difficult for people to get in shape, or are we here to make it easier?
So let me just touch on that for a second, because this is something that I talk about a lot in different podcasts or in my classes. One of the things that really frustrates me, and I get it, I understand why people do this, but like if you look at social media, and that's where people get a lot of fitness knowledge, and they kind of figure out what other people are doing. Most influencers or people that are on social media, they're going to highlight their most advanced exercises, or they're going to show you like the highest level of fitness they can produce. And the general person that's just sitting there on the couch on a Sunday afternoon says, oh, if I want to be fit, then I have to do those things. And that's a big problem in our field that I really need to try to find a way to get rid of, because how, like, everybody needs to understand that some of these people that you see, they've been doing this for 10 years, 20 years. Some people on social media, 3 or 4 decades, they've been training and they're showing off what they've been able to do. And so my point is that can be mentally challenging for the average person just trying to figure out what do they need to do to get healthy. When I train people or I get a new client, a lot of times, and they'd be like, they'll be like, wait, that's all you need me to do? A lot of times I'll just like, listen, go out for like a 20-minute walk. Like just start there, change these couple things that you're eating for a little bit more healthy foods. So my point here is small, steady changes over time is what's going to lead to long-term success. The people that try to do everything at once, yeah, they might have really good success for 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks. But most of the time, if you talk to them a year later, all that weight came back, or, they're basically in the same starting point that they were because they did too much too quick. So patience and consistency are the two biggest words in relation to fitness and health.
Yes, those are absolutely almost the end all be all. But what you were talking about, I just wanted to touch on that, was self-efficacy, building that self-efficacy through these little wins over and over and over again. Because what are we doing if we're setting this an 8 or 12 week milestone that we may not even hit, where it's culminating in us feeling as if we're a failure until that point, and then if we get whatever temporary goal that was, it's like that's so fleeting. But these little day-to-day victories, learning about the process, learning that you can as an individual kind of navigate this. And it is unfortunate that's just how social media is designed. And I don't think that the fitness industry and social media are ever going to be broken apart entirely. But what we're trying to do with Level is create this network and build up just a community of fitness professionals that we trust, that we believe in. And then we're going to go kind of on the front of, we've already started advertising for consumers, fitness consumers, just really trying to meet them in other places besides social media, because it is like a highlights reel. It is what is something that can get us the most views, the most follows, the most traction today. And it's interesting to us because our business is not at all based on social media. Obviously it can't be. But it's interesting to see just the fluctuations in, okay, they want reels now. Okay, I guess the last, our IGTV videos are garbage. Let's throw those away. Let's start making reels. It's just like this constant, like it has nearly nothing to do with what is happening to the consumers that are building this content. And I saw that actually, I don't know if this is a good sign, but I saw that TikTok is actually cracking down quite a bit on nutritional topics. I'm not sure how they're going to screen for these things, but that are the feeding into disordered eating patterns and actually eating disorders in teenage girls, because that's exploded. So it's just so many ways that the fitness industry, nutrition space is just intertwined with social media, that it's it's interesting to watch from like an observational, I mean, I can't talk this word, perspective, but it's just also at the same time we're living it. So it's like we've got this uphill battle nonstop that we're working against.
Yeah, and it's going to be a continuous uphill battle. And I know that at least here, in the United States, we had a situation in Texas, I believe,
Oh,
recently just came up.
yeah.
And I hope that stuff like that continuously comes up where people say, hey, listen, you can't do that on social media. That's not your professional. Basically, the conversation just comes down to scope of practice. People
Yeah.
just need to realize this is your scope of practice. These are the recommendations that you can give, and stay within that lane, so to speak. And that's the hard part about health. And once again, a whole nother podcast in and of itself. But we could talk about people who call themselves nutrition coaches, fitness coaches, life coaches.
Yeah.
The barrier to entry is very low, and that's really challenging. But yeah, let's get into some of the benefits of resistance training, if that
Yeah,
works.
please do.
Yep. So let me start with one of the things that I talk about in my class, all my classes a lot, is when we look at muscle. Muscle is an organ, okay? And in my opinion, and I'm not the only fitness professional to say this, but in my opinion, muscle is the organ of longevity. So if you want to live a long, healthy, good quality of life, one of the best things, and to be honest with you, in my opinion, probably the best thing you can do is maintain as much lean mass as possible. So muscle mass, right? And when I say lean mass, that also includes things like bone, tendons, ligaments, and bone is going to be a very important aspect of the conversation that I'll talk about in a little bit. So muscle is the organ of longevity, and your body is roughly about 40% muscle mass, okay? And let's just talk about the muscle aspect of resistance training first. So in my classes, I tell people, think of your muscle like a sponge. And that's literally what it wants to do during exercise. It wants to take in carbohydrates and it wants to take in fats. And carbohydrates are your dominant source of fuel during exercise. But one of the things that's really important that people need to know, if you resistance train on a regular basis, your muscles become more sensitive to taking up sugar, blood sugar. And so type 2 diabetes is one of the biggest conversations in today's fitness and health world. And one of the reasons why resistance training is so beneficial for either somebody that has type 2 diabetes or somebody that has pre-diabetes is it allows sugar to get out of the bloodstream and into the muscle where it produces less of an issue, right? Because hyperglycemia or high blood sugar is really a key component to diabetes and all of those conditions, really all kinds of metabolic conditions. And so people will ask, well, how does that work? So let me just give you a brief example. So when I exercise, think of sugar going into your muscle like doorways, right? So I open up a door and sugar can come in. At rest, you only have a certain number of doorways that sugar can come in. But when I lift weights, the number of doorways increases. So I can get more sugar into my bloodstream, into my muscle at a greater rate. So it's less of a detriment as far as blood sugar is concerned. Same thing with fat, right? I'm able to take the fat that's in the bloodstream, pull it into skeletal muscle, and either use it for energy or store it. So one of the things that I think not a lot of people in the general public realize, not only do you have fat, in your typical areas where you store fat, but you also have fat within your muscle. And typically somebody that's more fit stores more fat within their muscle because they can use it more effectively as a fuel source. So these are all key benefits. Basically, my point here is your metabolism is in a better spot if you do resistance training. And one of the most recent research articles that just came out was looking at metabolic rate over the course of, your whole lifespan, right? And without getting into too much detail, the key point of what they found was people who have more muscle mass, more lean tissue, keep a higher metabolic rate throughout the course of their life. And not only do we see that, we see better bone health as well. So we're seeing metabolic benefits, we're seeing bone benefits. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you, because I've been curious about that study ever since then. Do you, is so they didn't see as big of a decline as we would expect in metabolic rate just across the population over the age span, correct?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that great. Do you think that the reduction that they did see is coming exclusively from reductions in lean body mass? Is it from reduced activity, some combination of the two?
Good question. I think it's a combination of the two, because I think if you have, typically, from what I've seen, if you have more lean mass, typically most people, if you look on average, their metabolic rate is higher, like I had just mentioned, but I think they're what we call non-exercise activity. So basically things like fidgeting or moving around, like that activity is higher, which leads to a better total daily energy expenditure, and therefore is beneficial as far as body composition. So we really want to try and maintain as much of that lean mass as possible throughout the lifespan, because it's not only, it's not only impacting your overall metabolic rate. Like I said, it's impacting your NEAT, but it's also impacting the amount of calories you burn while you're working out. Because you have more mass to you, there's more of an energy expenditure there as well. So all of those factors are key points. And that's not even getting into, which I don't want to get into too much detail, but that's not even getting into the fact that more muscle mass, you have certain chemicals or compounds that are called myokines, which are basically hormones that your muscle produces and sends out to different areas of your body, which then impact metabolic rate in other tissues. So muscle communicates with other tissues of the body that impact metabolic rate. So we're learning a lot within the last couple of years as far as lean mass and resistance training and how beneficial it really is. And I love your statement of it almost seems too good to be true. I mean, I think in today's day and age, you could make the argument where resistance training and building lean mass is more important for longevity than something like cardiovascular training. And that's a really, like, I'm putting myself on a limb by saying that, but I think that we're getting closer and closer to making those solid arguments to where, yeah, resistance training might be king. We might find out a decade from now that, yeah, cardiovascular training is very, very beneficial. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But resistance training might be the bigger fish. And there's a lot of areas that I'm going to bring up in a second.
Please do. Yeah. That's a limb that I'm comfortable going out on as well. And it wasn't I've been burned too many times of feeling as if I knew that we had some sort of answers for anything, and realizing that that's not the case. But with resistance training, like just mechanistically, like I don't see it any better form. Nothing is, like I said earlier, nothing is compounding in the way. Like the diminishing returns from aerobic training, cardiovascular training, happen kind of quickly. I mean, you can definitely scale, but at a certain point, like I learned I can run about 15 miles and I will be dead afterwards. But like my body's not designed to go much further than that. I'm not a marathon runner. But resistance training, we can scale forever. So I want to keep going on some of those benefits, please.
Yeah, so let's talk about some cardiovascular health. So I wrote down a bunch of different things as far as cardiovascular health, because sometimes people say, okay, if I want cardiovascular health, I have to do cardio. No, not at all. Resistance training comes with a lot of good benefits. Number one, we see people who are resistance training on a regular basis have a lower resting heart rate. And so right then and there, their cardiovascular system is less stressed. We also see a lower resting blood pressure. And we also see both of these things with cardiovascular training as well, don't get me wrong, but we see a lower blood pressure. And one of the benefits to lowering your blood pressure is what we call the silent killer. And most people don't know that they necessarily have high blood pressure till they go to their family physician, and their family physician says, hey, listen, or their general practitioner says, hey, you have high blood pressure and you need to now take this medication or do these lifestyle changes. And it's very problematic because blood pressure, when it's high, it actually starts to like scrape away. I'm oversimplifying it, but I want people to understand. Like blood pressure creates something known as shear stress, which is almost like putting pressure on the cells that line the blood vessel walls. And that's what opens up an area for like fat to get into, specifically what we know as LDL cholesterol, to go into those areas and create what's called atherosclerosis, plaque buildup. And that basically limits the blood flow through the blood vessel, and it spikes pressure, and the heart has to work too hard. And one of the massive benefits to resistance training is clearly that I get a lower blood pressure. There's not as much stress against the blood vessel wall. I'm able to kind of have a better overall cardiovascular health. We also see a decrease in LDL cholesterol, or what most people call LDL lipoprotein. I don't like when people say LDL cholesterol, even though I said that, because people will know that's what it is. And then HDL is kind of the good lipoprotein. And so my point here is when you resistance train, you get less of the bad lipoprotein that kind of is an independent risk factor for heart disease. And you get more of the good lipoprotein, which kind of acts like a street sweeper and goes and cleans up a bunch of cholesterol and gets rid of it. So we get a benefit there, and that's really important. And then the last piece that I'll talk about is fat within the blood, something known as triglycerides. So just by doing resistance training, as well as aerobic training, but resistance training as well, we have a lot of good research where people will have less triglycerides or fat within their bloodstream. That also is a potential risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So not only is resistance training beneficial for the muscle, but it's also very beneficial for the cardiovascular system as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the basis for when I found out that I didn't have to do cardio to not only modulate, body composition, but also to have cardiovascular benefits, like that's one of those things. And you mentioned resting heart rate. Like my resting heart rate has remained lower, and perhaps it's because I'm not doing this chronic cardio where I am, having all of this sympathetic stress for potentially an hour, half, 2 hours a day. Like that was a big deal. That was a big stress on the system. You mentioned myokines, and that kind of led me to that. You said it was very emerging field. I wanted to ask you what bit of research around that's just the whole field of resistance training, lean body mass, all of that good stuff. What about this research that's coming out are you most excited about?
I'll tell you what I'm most excited about, and I say this because it hits home directly. So you just really hit a nerve with that question. Is my family, in our genetic line, we have a predisposition to Alzheimer's, different types of like cognitive issues and things like that. And one of the, I think a key area of research is resistance training, and it's decreasing the potential risk for things like Alzheimer's, any type of neurodegenerative disease of the brain. So we're starting to see great research on the crosstalk between muscle and brain. And we see crosstalk between muscle and bone, like I said, muscle and a bunch of other organs, but the brain's a key one, right? Obviously, your heart and your brain are the two vital organs that, we need to make sure that we can preserve as much as possible. So I think that's a really exciting area. There's a specific portion of the brain known as the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is basically really important for learning and memory. And it allows you to remember, different experiences and things like that. And it's really a key component to Alzheimer's and stuff like that. And we're seeing, like I said, a great benefit to resistance training and less of a deterioration in those areas. So I think that's a key aspect of it. Another thing that I think is important that really excites me, and we need more research on this, but we're getting it, is the antioxidant capacity of resistance training. So resistance training, similar to aerobic training, is it allows your body to combat against something known as free radicals. And for some people listening, you may have never heard that term before, but think of free radicals like the enemy. They're going in and kind of like destroying or disrupting cells. And antioxidants are the good guys that come in and kind of neutralize those free radicals and provide for better cellular health and therefore better longevity. And so that's another area that we're seeing resistance training play a key role in combating against these free radicals and increasing the antioxidant or the protection that your body has against certain things that can be very, very detrimental overall to cellular health. So I think those are two key areas to answer that question the best.
You said less of a deterioration of the hippocampus in Alzheimer's from resistance training, and I think that that kind of idea, accepting that we're like a biological system, and that all we are really trying to do with resistance training and exercise and nutrition and recovery and sleep and everything is to create a less of deterioration overall. Like we're not trying to live forever. We're just trying not to push the can down that down that road more than it needs to be. And as somebody who has multiple TBIs, like that's also one of the cognitive effects, the effects on depression, anxiety. Man, it's fascinating how there's just so many of them with resistance training. Is there any other benefits that you wanted to touch on?
I mean, I could go into some other things as far as like, a lot of people struggle with joint pain and low back pain and things like that. And unfortunately, there's a lot of information on social media where, resistance training can be bad for your joints and it can be problematic as far as ligaments and things like that. Here's the deal with that. And so I do want to get into just briefly talk about some of those things. It can be very beneficial for, osteoarthritis. It can be very beneficial for joint health. It can be very beneficial for low back. People who struggle with arthritis and fibromyalgia, which is basically, random pain that people feel that we don't really know the source of it. And one of the things that people will say that, resistance training won't help that is their argument is flawed because what they typically mean is, yeah, if you go balls to the wall or pedal to the metal with your resistance training, yeah, you're not going to be able to recover effectively. And yes, you're going to experience some joint pain and things like that because you're overloading it too quickly. If you program things correctly, you shouldn't experience that. And on the flip side of it, you should get great benefit with arthritic pain or low back pain or anything along those lines. I think one of the things that's also really important is, and I talk about this a lot in strength and conditioning, my strength and conditioning class, the tendons in your ligaments tend to they tend to adapt slower than the muscle. So when someone first comes into resistance training or strength training or lifting weights, they say, oh, well, in high school, I used to lift this weight, so I want to try and get there as quickly as possible. And you get stronger muscularly much quicker than your tendons and your ligaments can keep up with. And a lot of that's related to the nervous system, which once again is a whole separate conversation. But the point there is you have to progress this stuff gradually. If you don't, that's what tends to lead to these orthopedic problems. Not the fact that it was resistance training that was doing that. It's just the fact that you pushed it a little bit too far. And then the last thing I'll say is, unfortunately, it is a stress to your body. So nobody, as far as I know, lifted weights or resistance trained their whole life without ever experiencing some level of an ache or a pain. So you do need to realize, as somebody that's just getting into health and fitness, or maybe even somebody that's just kind of really trying to take it to the next level, that is a part of the game. And so don't listen to people that say, oh, if you do it correctly, you'll never feel, a small little tweak, or you'll never feel an ache or a pain. Of course you will. That's part of the trial and error experience of lifting weights or resistance training. You need to find what exercises work best for you, how much volume. There might be certain times where you push it and you do too many sets and reps. Okay, I learned from that and I just dial it back. These are things that people need to recognize. And unfortunately, those are the things that people on the opposite side of the spectrum will take and say, oh, that's why you shouldn't resistance train, or that's why you shouldn't do that, is because these people experience these potential issues. No, that's part of the game. And if you do it the right way, you'll minimize it, but you'll never completely get rid of it.
I personally think that I personally feel that the natural bodybuilding space is going to kind of lead or take a much bigger role in the fitness space. Hopefully, this is all wishful thinking, obviously, going forward, because if you look at the injury rates in bodybuilding, specifically natural bodybuilders, because as soon as you start, pushing gear, gosh, there's just no idea what could happen there. But in natural bodybuilding, it is so incredibly low. It's so incredibly low as compared to any other sport, and training for any other sport. Running, running is, as I'm sure you've mentioned to people, is incredibly injurious for people. Like, it's not a great thing for most people to do. But if we can start getting intelligent natural bodybuilding programs with basic, tenets of resistance training, progressive overload, all that good stuff, training, sufficiently close to failure, like the injury rates for that are incredibly low. And also, like, if we, back to all the lean body mass benefits, if we increase your lean body mass, you're saying it is incredibly important for health span, longevity. Like, let's start getting people jacked. Let's start getting bodybuilding programs out to the average person.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's a key point that I missed as far as the injury rates of people that resistance train or strength train on a regular basis are much lower than what we see in other sports. And so they really should listen to that, Like, it's not to say that people don't get hurt, because no matter what you do with your body, there's a potential risk for injury. You can't ever completely get rid of it. But yes, people who are consistent with it tend to have a lower injury risk. And then the other thing I just want to throw out there before I forget about it, Josh,
Yeah.
is in relation to another benefit to strength training, because it comes out all the time. People want to talk about insulin and insulin resistance. So I just want to highlight that briefly, because I did talk about how muscle takes up sugar more effectively. And part of that also is related to insulin resistance. So insulin is a hormone that allows sugar to go from your bloodstream to your muscle. And when you resistance train on a regular basis, your muscle cells become more sensitive to that insulin, and that also allows you to get more blood sugar into your muscle as well. So that's a really key aspect, because I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. We have a situation where a lot of people are eating more calories than they should be, and blood sugar regulation is off, calorie control is off. So resistance training, or strength training in general, is really, really beneficial to not only allow blood sugar regulation to get that blood sugar out, but also sensitize the muscles to be able to absorb it even more, which I think is important.
It's incredibly important. Yeah, blood. Yeah, I don't want to. Like I said, we'll go down. I'll make sure to make a list, and I'll send you the list, and we'll see. Let's start knocking out some podcasts one by one. Because there's so many topics that need to be touched on, and we only ended up coming up with more and more. But I wanted to say, I have one more question for you. But I wanted to say, I appreciate your content. Your profile is absolutely adding to the collective intelligence of the fitness industry and the people within it. So thank you very much. I appreciate your content. We're going to continue sharing and everything like that. My final question for you, though, how do you feel personally that the fitness industry can improve just overall?
I think the fitness industry needs to improve from this basic standpoint. And I think it's really hard to do this, but this is what we need. We need to get less people on the two extremes of any topic, and we need more people in the middle that know how to describe the context. So one of the things that, I am always preaching all over social media or my classes or any podcast that I do, context is everything. So in the fitness world, so many people want to just say, oh, this one research study showed this, so everybody needs to do this. And they're putting people in kind of these silos of this is the right path. Let's face it, there are many, many paths to get to the finish line for almost any fitness goal that you have. So if there's anybody out there that says this is the right or only way, you probably don't want to listen to them. You want people that are going to say, this is a way to do it. Here's where it's not going to be beneficial. Here's where it is going to be beneficial. So people are telling you the pros and cons. And I think that's what needs to change more than anything in our fitness space. We need people to simply be honest and tell people This is what is the benefit of this. This is what are the potential drawbacks or the risks. You make the best decision for you as the consumer of this fitness and health knowledge. And unfortunately, in today's day and age where everybody wants to make a quick buck, that's really challenging, but we need more people that are willing to do that for sure.
Yeah, it's going to come down to one by one people that are to some degree they need to be credentialed and experienced as well, though, because I mean standing in that middle is definitely, it can be a lonely place, and if your business rides on, you know, actually selling things, that's tough to make that argument. But someone like yourself who is really just kind of, I want to say, I hate using the word courageously because it's like, I'm sure you would say, like, you know, there are bigger battles out there in the world, but kind of courageously standing there and leading the way a little bit. So again, Dr. Swart, thank you very much for coming on, man, and helping us get a little bit less wrong over time.
Yeah, no, I just want to say I appreciate you allowing me to come on your platform and be able to share my knowledge. It's always exciting to do stuff like this. So I appreciate the opportunity.